With Trump's tariffs looming, will countries scramble to cut deals? Will they retaliate, comply or negotiate? Let's find that out in this video. In this video we analyze the latest developments in Trump's war of tariffs. Hello everyone. Welcome to the Explorer's Life and Learning Hub, where we explore, live and learn with a curious mind. Let's dive right in the latest Trump news on tariffs. A decision by US President Donald Trump to place a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium imports has left some of the US's major trade partners scrambling to make a deal. The US is a major steel importer, importing nearly a quarter of the steel it uses, according to data from the American Iron and Steel Institute, which adds that its dependence on aluminium is even greater. Its neighbors Canada and Mexico, as well as some allies in Asia, are among its main suppliers. Trump has said his latest tariffs will take effect on the 12th of March without exceptions or exemptions. With just over a month to go before the tax kicks in, here is how some countries have responded. Canada. As one of the largest suppliers of both commodities to the US, Canada has a lot to lose. Canada has extra reasons for irritation as they are the largest steel supplier and one of the largest aluminum suppliers to the US, says Deborah Elms, a trade expert with the Hinwick Foundation. Canada's Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne has slammed the decision, calling it totally unjustified. In a post on X, he said Canadian steel is being used in key US industries including defense, shipbuilding and energy, adding that this made North America more competitive and secure. He added that Canada would defend our industries as we have always done and always will, and warned that Canada's response would be clear and calibrated. Australia. Though Trump has said he will not consider any exceptions, it seems like he may set this rule aside for Australia. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said he had spoken on the phone with Trump and that the US leader was considering an exemption. Calling Albanese a very fine man, Trump had earlier explained that the US runs a trade surplus with Australia. The reason is they buy a lot of airplanes. They're rather far away and they need lots of airplanes, Trump said. We actually have a surplus, it's one of the only countries which we do. But despite being the world's largest exporter of iron ore, a key steel-making raw material, Australia's exports of steel itself are not as significant. According to Albanese, Australian steel accounts for about 1% of US imports, though its steel is used by a major US military shipbuilder. South Korea. South Korea is a major steel exporter to the US, according to the American Iron and Steel Institute. Its steel is used by homegrown firms like Hyundai, Kia, Samsung and LG, all of which have factories in the US and Mexico. On Tuesday, Trade Minister Chung In-kyo said South Korea would actively consider whether there was room for negotiation with the US, a day after the industry ministry held an emergency meeting with steelmakers. In 2018, when Trump similarly imposed a 25% tariff on all steel imports, Seoul was granted a waiver in exchange for a yearly import quota. UK and Europe. The UK has said the government will take a considered approach and will speak with the US about the details, but wants to be clear it will be working in the national interest. However, the BBC understands the UK will not retaliate immediately, and Chancellor Rachel Reeves has said she strongly believes that a deal can be done. The trade body UK Steel has said in a statement that the tariffs would deliver a devastating blow to their industry. The US is our second largest export market after the EU. At a time of shrinking demand and high costs, rising protectionism globally, particularly in the US, will stifle our exports and damage over £400 million, $494 million, worth of the steel sector's contribution to the UK's balance of trade, Gareth Stace, UK Steel's Director General, said in a statement. It is deeply disappointing if President Trump sees the need to target UK steel, given our relatively small production volumes compared to major steel nations, he said, adding that there was a danger that other countries could redirect steel to the UK market to avoid US tariffs. On Tuesday, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen responded by saying unjustified tariffs on the EU will not go unanswered. They will trigger firm and proportionate countermeasures. The EU will act to safeguard its economic interests, she said. I deeply regret the US decision to impose tariffs on European steel and aluminum exports. Tariffs are taxes, bad for business, worse for consumers. According to trade group Eurometal, the US was the second largest market for EU exports of iron and steel. Trump imposed tariffs on both the UK and the EU during his first term, but those restrictions were later relaxed by the Biden administration. India's Steel Secretary Sandeep Poundrik has reportedly claimed that Trump's tariffs will not have much of an impact, pointing to the fact that India exports only a small fraction of its steel to the US. How much steel do we actually export to the US? Poundrik said at an industry event, according to a PTI report. We produced 145 million tons of steel last year, of which 95,000 tons was exported to the US. So, how does it matter if out of 145 million tons, you are not able to export 95,000 tons? But not everyone shares this sentiment. The chief of the Indian Steel Association, ISA, Naveen Jindal, has said he is deeply concerned that US restrictions could lead steel makers to dump their steel in the Indian market at lower prices. These tariffs are expected to slash steel exports to the US by 85%, creating a massive surplus that will likely flood India, which is one of the few major markets without trade restrictions, he claimed. What next? In the latest news, Trump says no exemptions with metal tariffs to start in March. Leaders in Europe and Canada have said they will not let Donald Trump's plans to hit their steel and aluminium exports with tariffs go unchallenged. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the move would trigger firm and proportionate countermeasures, while Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also pledged to stand up for Canadian workers and businesses. The comments came after the US president ordered a 25% import tax on all steel and aluminium entering the US, ending previous exemptions for allies including Canada and the EU and marking a major expansion of trade barriers. Trump said he was simplifying the rules and the measures would boost domestic production. This is a big deal, the beginning of making America rich again, Trump said, signing the proclamation, which said the measures would come into force on the 12th of March. Our nation requires steel and aluminium to be made in America, not in foreign lands, he added. The US is the world's largest importer of steel, counting Canada, Brazil and Mexico as its top 3 suppliers. Canada alone accounted for more than 50% of aluminium imported into the US last year. The tariffs will raise the cost of bringing the metals into the US, sparking concern among businesses in the US that rely on the imports and many world leaders because it will make it more expensive for companies to sell their products in the world's largest economy. If the tariffs come into force as outlined, they are expected to have the most significant impact on Canada. Late on Monday, Canada's Minister of Innovation, François-Philippe Champagne, said the tariffs were totally unjustified. Trudeau said he hoped talks with the Trump administration would avoid dollar-for-dollar retaliation. But the lobby group for Canadian steelmakers called on the Canadian government to retaliate against the US immediately, while Cody Blois, a leading MP from Canada's governing Liberal Party, said his country was looking for ways to reduce its trade relationship with the US. This is completely upending what has been a very strong partnership, he told BBC NewsHour ahead of the official order. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen also warned unjustified tariffs on the EU will not go unanswered. They will trigger firm and proportionate countermeasures. The EU will act to safeguard its economic interests, she said. Tariffs are taxes, bad for business, worse for consumers. But hey, wait a minute. What are tariffs and why are they Trump's golf field? US President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium imports. He has already introduced a 10% tax on all products from China, which has responded with its own measures, and has threatened to introduce tariffs on products from Canada and Mexico. Trump says tariffs will boost the US economy and protect the country from illegal immigration and the flow of drugs. Another important question is, what are tariffs and how do they work? Tariffs are taxes charged on goods imported from other countries. The companies that bring the foreign goods into the country pay the tax to the government. Typically, tariffs are a percentage of a product's value. The 10% tariff on Chinese goods means a product worth $10 would have an additional $1 charge applied to it. Firms may choose to pass on some or all of the cost of tariffs to customers. But hey, why is Trump using tariffs as his golf game? Tariffs are a central part of Trump's economic plans. He promised to introduce import duties against some of America's main trade partners during his election campaign. He says tariffs will boost US manufacturing and protect jobs, as well as raising tax revenue and growing the economy. The White House said the president was also taking bold action to hold Mexico, Canada, and China accountable to their promises of halting illegal immigration and stopping poisonous fentanyl and other drugs from flowing into our country. Fentanyl is linked to tens of thousands of overdose deaths in the US each year. The Trump administration says the chemicals come from China, while Mexican gangs supply it illegally and run fentanyl labs in Canada. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said his country was responsible for less than 1% of fentanyl entering the US. How will the steel and aluminum tariffs work? Trump says the 25% tariff on both metals will come into effect on the 12th of March, with no exceptions. The US is the world's largest importer of steel, with Canada, Brazil and Mexico its top 3 suppliers. Canada also provided more than 50% of the aluminium imported into the US in 2024. Shares of US steelmakers rose following the announcement. However, American companies which use steel and aluminium to make products have warned the tariffs could put their prices up. The Canadian government said the tariffs were totally unjustified and vowed swift retaliation. Trump previously announced tariffs of 25% on steel and 15% on aluminium in 2018, during his first term as president. However, he subsequently negotiated exceptions for many countries including Australia, Canada, and Mexico. Despite the exemptions, tariffs raised the average price of steel and aluminium in the US by 2.4% and 1.6% respectively, according to the US International Trade Commission. And how is the current state of things? What is happening with tariffs against China, Canada, and Mexico? Together, China, Mexico, and Canada accounted for more than 40% of imports into the US in 2024. China. A 10% charge on all goods imported from China to the US took effect on the 4th of February. Trump then said shipments worth less than $800, £645, would be exempt. Beijing retaliated with its own tariffs, which took effect on the 10th of February. These include a 15% tariff on US coal and liquefied natural gas products, and a 10% tariff on crude oil, agricultural machinery and large engine cars. China has repeatedly voiced its opposition to a trade war with the US. Canada. A proposed tariff of 25% on all goods entering from Canada was also due to begin on the 4th of February. However, this was delayed for 30 days. Canada also paused its own retaliatory tariff of 25% on 155 billion Canadian dollars worth, $107 billion, £86 billion of US imports. Prime Minister Trudeau said Canada was implementing a $1.3 billion border plan to add new choppers, technology and personnel to border, as well as increased resources to stop the flow of fentanyl. Much of the border security plan had already been announced. Trump said the delay would allow the US to see whether or not a final economic deal with Canada could be reached. But Canada could play the card of booze, oil and orange juice against the US, you know what I mean. Mexico. The proposed 25% tariffs against Mexico have also been delayed a month, as have new measures by Mexico against US goods. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum agreed to send 10,000 members of the National Guard to the US-Mexican border to prevent the trafficking of drugs, in particular fentanyl. Sheinbaum said the US had in turn agreed to increase measures to prevent the trafficking of high-powered US weapons into Mexico. And a little bit of a prognosis here. Which products will be affected and will prices increase? All goods from China worth more than $800 are covered by the 10% tariff. Economists warn that firms selling imported goods are likely to increase prices for US consumers to cover the cost of the duty. If the measures against Mexican and Canadian imports go ahead, items they produce are also expected to become more expensive. Car manufacturing could be hit extremely hard. Vehicle parts cross the US, Mexican and Canadian borders multiple times before a vehicle is completely assembled. The average US car price could increase by $3,000 because of the import taxes, financial analyst TD Economics suggested. Other goods from Mexico which could be affected include fruit, vegetables, spirits and beer. Canadian goods such as steel, timber, grains and potatoes are also likely to get more expensive. Canadian energy would face a 10% tariff instead of 25%. US tariffs on imported washing machines between 2018 and 2023 increased the price of laundry equipment by 34%, according to official statistics. Prices fell once the tariffs expired. Some experts suggest that Trump's new round of tariffs could prompt a wider trade war which could put prices up more generally. Capital Economics said the annual rate of US inflation could increase from 2.9% to as high as 4%. Will the UK and Europe have to pay tariffs? Trump previously told the BBC the UK was out of line, but suggested a solution could be worked out. The UK exports pharmaceutical products, cars and scientific instruments to the US. Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds said the UK should be excluded from tariffs because it buys more from the US than it sells there. Speaking in Parliament after the announcement of the steel and aluminium tariffs, Trade Minister Douglas Alexander said the UK would not have a knee-jerk reaction but a cool and clear-headed response. Trump also said he was considering imposing tariffs on the EU because they take almost nothing from the US, and we take everything from them. In 2024, the US had a trade deficit of $213 billion with the EU, which Trump described as an atrocity. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen strongly criticized the new steel and aluminium levies. Unjustified tariffs on the EU will not go unanswered, she said. US companies Harley-Davidson, which manufactures motorcycles, and whiskey distilleries such as Jack Daniel's have previously faced EU tariffs. But where is Africa in this whole debate? Africa's economic profile is distinct from those of more industrialized regions. Many African nations rely heavily on exporting raw materials, agricultural produce, and minerals, products that, while essential, don't always capture high value on the global stage. This position creates a unique set of challenges and opportunities. On one hand, Africa isn't directly targeted by the tariffs imposed on finished goods from other regions. On the other hand, global shifts in supply chains could either sideline or spotlight African exports depending on how trade realigns in the coming years. Now let's talk about the opportunities. With global companies scrambling to adjust to tariff barriers, some experts suggest that Africa could emerge as a strategic partner. As businesses seek new sources for raw materials and manufacturing inputs, African nations have the potential to attract increased investment, provided they can scale up their value-add processes. Investments in infrastructure, technology, and manufacturing could allow African countries to move up the value chain. Instead of simply exporting raw materials, there's an opportunity to develop finished products and processed goods that command higher prices and generate more jobs domestically. In essence, if African nations can implement strategic reforms and attract the right partnerships, they might turn global trade challenges into catalysts for sustainable growth and economic diversification. However, it's not all smooth sailing. Africa faces several challenges that could hinder its ability to fully capitalize on these global shifts. Many countries on the continent still struggle with inadequate infrastructure, limited technological access, and governance issues that can deter significant foreign investment. Furthermore, as global supply chains adjust, African economies may face stiff competition from emerging players in Asia and Latin America. Without robust policy reforms and investment in human capital, it might be difficult for Africa to transition from being a raw material supplier to a hub of value-added production. These risks underscore the importance of comprehensive development strategies and international cooperation to ensure that Africa's trade sector evolves in a way that benefits its people from a global perspective. Trump's tariffs have sparked a broader debate about protectionism versus free trade. Many countries, including those in Africa, are watching closely as the US reevaluates its trade policies. While some nations see tariffs as a barrier to progress, others view the ensuing trade wars as an opportunity to forge new alliances and diversify their trade partners. International organizations and trade experts are calling for more multilateral solutions that address these challenges head-on. For Africa, this could mean negotiating more favorable trade deals and leveraging its unique resources to become a key player in the global market. In conclusion, while Africa isn't the primary target of Trump's tariffs, the repercussions of these trade policies ripple far and wide. Africa stands at a crossroads, facing both significant challenges and promising opportunities. With strategic reforms and targeted investments, African nations have the potential to transform these global shifts into stepping stones for economic growth. As the world continues to navigate the complexities of global trade, Africa's role will be crucial. It's a dynamic moment in history, and the decisions made today will shape the continent's economic future for decades to come. Thank you for watching this analysis of global trends on Trump's tariffs war. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more insights from Ree the Explorer's Life and Learning Hub. I'm Ree. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.